Dr. Joe Belth, it is our honor to visit with you this morning. I can't tell you in all fairness, and as a compliment, I would say you're the Ralph Nader of the life insurance industry.
I appreciate that. I know Ralph pretty well, and I consider that a compliment.
Well, thank you. You had a 53-year distinguished career at one of the great business schools in one of the finest public universities in America. Did those 53 autumns go pretty quickly?
They went faster and faster as I got older, but I think I have a theory on that, and that is that each year is a smaller part of your total life and therefore passes more quickly. But that's just a theory. But in answer to your question, yes.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think actuaries would agree with you. Did you always feel like you had academic freedom here at Indiana University?
Oh, absolutely. There were several demonstrations of Indiana protecting academic freedom. It's a great university. And I'll never forget, I wasn't on the campus 3 weeks when I was brought here as a visiting assistant professor to do a study under a grant from Consumers Union about life insurance. And I knew very quickly that the information I needed for the study was not in the public domain, so I would have to send a questionnaire to the companies. And I was busily working on the questionnaire, and the chairman of the insurance area, his name was Ed Hedges at the time, he comes into my office one day and he says, "I'm about to go over to the president's office, so we're going to be talking about you." I said, "Oh, really? What's going on?" He said, "We've gotten a complaint from a prominent alumnus who's in the insurance business." And so I said, "Well, do I have anything to worry about?" And he said, "Joe, you don't have anything to worry about. You don't seem to understand. This is where Alfred Kinsey did his research." So I said, "Oh, well," because I was familiar with Kinsey's research on human sexual behavior, and I couldn't imagine that my work was going to be even close in terms of controversy. When he came back from the meeting, I asked him what happened. He said they would very much appreciate it if, when you send out the questionnaire, that you deposit a copy over in the president's office for their files. And I did that, and so that's all I ever heard. But that was just one example. There were other examples as well.
Where did the idea of the insurance forum come from?
The insurance forum came out of a series of about 8 years during which I had my stuff heavily censored by people in the insurance business and even academics who were afraid they were going to offend people in the insurance business. And there were all sorts of incidents, many of which I described in my book.
Right.
But I went through several possibilities and wound up with the idea of just an independent newsletter in which I could call it as I saw it.
Exactly.
And without anybody looking over my shoulder, and that's how it started.
Did it keep you young?
I think it probably did.
Great.
That's probably true.
Did each issue have its own ups and downs, and did you feel like there was always a time where you weren't sure the next thing you were going to print, and then you had more things to print?
No, I had almost always. I had more material I was working on than I could really adequately keep up with. I had to actually pick and choose.
Yeah.
There were just lots of topics.
Who do you think has more clout these days? Would it be governmental agencies or rating agencies?
In terms of clout, you mean in terms of affecting the behavior of insurance companies?
If we have a life insurance company that's hiding the ball, who are they more afraid of? A rating agency or a state department of insurance?
That's an interesting question. They're probably concerned about both, but I had never thought of which one might be, what might be more concerned. The rating agencies, state regulation of insurance is strictly an historical accident, and we have it,
Yep.
and we're stuck with it. But the states have never really achieved uniformity, and as a result, you've got states going off their own way, and they don't have good funding. By and large, they're really underfunded, which means that if they want to take on a company that's doing something that they don't like, they may be hampered. They may not, they generally can't win the argument. There was one incident I remember where California, which is the insurance department there is one of the better funded departments, they had a dispute with an insurance company, and they made a decision, and the company appealed, and it was going through an administrative law procedure, and there was a hearing before an administrative law judge, and the company turned up about, I think, approximately 12 top lawyers, and the department was represented by a young staff attorney, one young staff attorney, who at the time just happened to be pregnant. And you can imagine who won that argument before the administrative law judge. But that's an example. They're just not. That's why insurance companies won't take on an insurance company. It's not because they're afraid. It's because if they really take them on, they're not going to be able to afford to follow through. So as a result, they just let it go.
Yep.
As far as the rating agencies are concerned, I think there's concern there on the part of companies. But the stuff that the rating agencies get from the companies, for the most part, the special material they get is confidential. And so the insurance companies can talk quite frankly with the rating agencies, not fearing that it's going to get out.
Okay.
But the rating agencies certainly have some clout, but whether it's more than the state regulators, I don't know.
Think back in time, 25 years ago. Did some of the rating agencies possibly miss executive life?
Executive life, yeah, one of my favorite topics at the time. The rating agencies did miss the boat. At least two of them did. AM Best and S&P had them with top ratings almost until the end.
Okay.
But the other two rating agencies, there was Moody's, and at that time it was Duff and Phelps, which is now Fitch.
Right.
They had much lower ratings for executive life, but nobody knew about their ratings because they didn't advertise them. The companies could pick and choose what ratings they were going to advertise. In fact, that incident was what prompted my first effort at putting together a special ratings issue, which would show for each company all the ratings right together, one after the other. And that became a staple of the insurance forum.
You know, one other staple that I've always appreciated, you have published the amounts of money executives are paid, and I think the benchmark used to be 100,000.
We started out at 100,000, and there were not many that made 100,000.
And that might have been in the 70s?
In the 70s, in the early 70s.
And I think now it's $1 million.
The threshold, when I finished up in with the 2013 special exec comp issue, it was 2012, and my threshold was $1 million.
$1 million. Were you appreciative?
And there were a lot more executives there than.
Were you appreciative of the Nebraska Department of Insurance for publishing that?
Yeah, they don't actually publish it. They assemble it, and in recent years they've done it on a CD, and it's very easy to get it. And but I still have problems with Nebraska's tabulation.
You do?
Just like I have problems with New York's tabulation, and they won't pay any attention to me, and I'm not taking it personally, but I keep making suggestions, and they don't want to change.
Okay.
They don't want to change horses in the middle of the stream, I guess.
What do you think about long-term care insurance, and where do you think, just a personal opinion, where do you think we're headed with this? If we were sitting here 10 years from now, what's going to happen?
Actually, when it comes to long-term care insurance, I fear the worst. And I say that hesitatingly, but that's the way I feel. I've been saying for a long time that the long-term care exposure is of a type that cannot be solved through the mechanism of private insurance. And I've written on that subject and in some detail, but not many people bother to read it. And they certainly didn't read it, and they ignored it at the time. But it has really come home to roost. And I do fear the worst. We have a situation now with a company that is apparently going to be liquidated, which brings in the state guarantee associations to make up the shortfall, and where the insurance companies have to contribute. And I'm afraid that the upper limit of the amount they can be assessed is going to be reached, and as a result, there are going to be policyholders who are going to suffer financially. And but they're not alone, because there are some other companies that are having their problems, and they just published some figures recently that there were over 200 companies going back at the peak 10 or so years ago. 200 companies offering long-term care insurance. This particular study said there are now 12. Now, why are they out of the business? They're out of the business because they found out that they couldn't deal with it.
Right.
And and people are screaming about premium increases. Justifiably. I mean, they didn't realize that they were going to be subject to these repeated and large premium increases. And some people blame the actuaries for bad assumptions. The actuaries are a favorite target for people who want to criticize the insurance industry. But the fact is that there wasn't any way to deal with what I call the long-term care exposure through private insurance. And the reason I fear for the worst is I think this is going to adversely, they're now talking about, or some companies are actually combining long-term care insurance and life insurance.
Is that a good thing?
I think not, because if you tie something that is unworkable to something that has worked for a couple of centuries, what's going to happen? I'm afraid that the unworkable portion is going to take down the tried and true portion, which is the life insurance portion.
On that same subject, you know a lot about life insurance. You know a lot about annuities. What do you think about fixed indexed annuities and life insurance?
I wish I could tell you more about fixed index annuities, but I don't really understand fixed index annuities thoroughly.
You don't understand
And
them?
a lot of people have said, how come you don't write articles about fixed index annuities? My answer to that is, I never write an article on a subject that I don't feel comfortable discussing, that I feel I understand adequately. And I have gotten my hands on a few fixed index annuities, the actual documents, and I just haven't been able to manage it. And some of my critics who are busily selling fixed index annuities tell me that, Belth, you're too stupid to understand a good thing when you see it. And I said, well, maybe you're right, and I just don't understand it, and so I haven't written about it. But I have written about some of the things going on in the annuity business, and the Department of Labor rule, everybody came out of the woodwork opposing that. Not that it's going to mean anything. There have been 2 court victories now for the Department of Labor, but I don't think it's going anywhere because it's supposed to go into effect in April of 2017, and we're going to have a Trump-appointed Secretary of Labor who will probably withdraw it. So I'm not sure that the legal battles that are going on, there are 4 lawsuits going on, are going to be fruitful.
If I run a life insurance company and I transfer a block of business or sell a block of business that isn't quite as profitable as what I really hope for, is that a bad thing, a good thing, or is it somewhere in between?
When you say it's not as profitable, you mean the fact that it's not as profitable is a good thing? I think, let's say this, there's got to be sufficient profit in the venture in order to make it attractive to people to go into that area.
Right.
So I don't have any problem with making profits. So I'm not sure about the thrust of your question.
If we have a block of business I don't want to deal with anymore, and I explain to the actuarial department and the marketing department and the legal department, get rid of that.
Well, now you're into an area which
is that a bad thing for the consumer?
The answer to that, what you're talking about, is one of my favorite topics.
Okay.
And that is the transfer of blocks of business from one insurance company to another. I've been fighting a war in that area for 20 or 25 years or so. And the problem is, what troubles me about those transfers is that they are done without generally speaking now, they are done without the informed, positive consent of the policyholders who are affected. And what I've argued for is that when the policies are transferred, they should not be, the company that's doing the transferring should not be relieved of those liabilities, except when the affected policyholders individually consent, are informed and positively consent to letting the original company off the hook. That's basically where I'm coming from.
Let's go one step further. If a company sells their block of business, or if the company elects to sell itself to a hedge fund, is that a good thing?
Probably not. I was talking about transferring blocks of business because
right.
I think that's what you were talking about a moment ago. But when a company is sold, acquired, or whatever you want to say, by what is sometimes called private equity or whatever, I think I'm troubled by that, because I view life insurance as a very long-term commitment on the part of the insurance company. And my impression of these private equity firms is that they have a short-term view. And I don't think that's compatible with the long view that's necessary for life insurance. And that's why I think it's not a good thing. But this is, by the way, one of the places where the rating agencies are hamstrung. They can't know what's going to happen to a company when it's going to. They do a rating of a company. How do they know? Maybe a year or two from now, that company is going to be sold and be under totally different control. What can they do in their ratings to caution people? And there's nothing they can do. When it happens, they can then review the ratings and possibly lower the ratings, or possibly not. But the rating agencies, that's one of the drawbacks. You got a long-term financial instrument, but the person who buys the insurance doesn't know who he's really going to be dealing with down the road. And I don't know how to deal with that.
Knowing that, does the Glass-Steagall Act look better to you today than it might have when we got rid of it?
Yeah, I regard it as probably a mistake that they repealed it, and there's even been talk about reinstituting it, but that's really outside my field of interest because I'm not in the banking or investment banking business.
Some of the big mutuals that are doing exceptionally well today are advertising interest rates connected to their dividends. Is that in itself a bit misleading?
Yes. The dividends are, generally speaking, consisting of three components: interest, mortality, and expense. And if a company has a dividend interest rate of 7%, well, all right, they have a dividend interest rate of 7%. That doesn't mean that this is a 7% dividend scale, which some of them like to call it, or something. I think that's deceptive.
Okay.
Because they can play all kinds of games over, especially in the expense factor. And so it's not really fair to say. In fact, there was a time when most companies would never disclose their dividend interest rate.
Interesting.
They would never disclose it.
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden, they like to be able to say, well, we have a 7% dividend scale, or even if they say it's a 7% dividend interest rate, which is technically true, the answer is so what? Because tell us about your expense component. But they won't talk about that. So.
Going back over all these years, you've seen a lot. I think it's a fact you knew Solomon Huebner.
Yes, I actually met him. He had retired when I arrived at Penn in 1958 to begin my graduate work. He had retired, but he had an office in what was Huebner Hall. It was the main building of the American College. And my first position after I got my degree was I was on the staff out at the American College. And so Huebner had an office there. And we occasionally went to lunch with him. A few staffers would occasionally go to lunch. He was a real character, very interesting guy. So yes, I did know him, but not really well.
Did you enjoy teaching as much as the research that you did?
I enjoyed both.
Okay.
I got some inspiration out of my students, especially my graduate students. And but my greatest interest was, I mean, I have to confess that my greatest interest was in doing research and just studying what is going on
Yep.
In the insurance business.
Some days, did you feel or see yourself kind of as a forensic detective?
Not really. I just, I'm not sure I would qualify as a forensic detective. You know, I've never been an actuary. I've never been a lawyer or anything like that. But I just did like to dig in
Yep.
and try to understand. That's why I've tried to understand fixed index annuities.
Okay.
I can't get my arms around it, at least not yet.
Okay. Could you tell in your heart of hearts when a company was trying to hide the ball?
I sometimes got suspicious. Yeah.
Would it usually
little things would,
Yeah.
I would get the idea that there's something going on here.
Would it generally, if you were drawing a line back with a pencil, would it be in accounting or reinsurance?
It could be almost anything.
Okay.
It could be almost anything.
Could you tell by the way the questions were answered?
Oh, yeah, yes.
Okay.
If they were answered at all.
Right.
Frequently they wouldn't answer at all. But when they did, I was aware when they were running around the main issues. And I sometimes followed through and would try to get to the bottom of it.
Good for you. Did you ever feel discouraged?
No, I never felt discouraged.
Good.
But actually, it kept my adrenaline flowing to be working on these things, and I never really got discouraged. I mean, I've proposed things which never went anywhere,
Right.
and so I keep working at it. And
Let me ask you, if I could, on some things that might have surprised you over the years. Are you surprised interest rates have been so low so long?
yes, I'm not sure that it's as unprecedented as some people seem to think, because I was not involved in insurance research at the time. It's when I was in the business back in the early 50s. But interest rates, market interest rates, were very low. And savings accounts, you were lucky if they were earning 1%. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not sure that low interest rates are unprecedented, but there's no question that they are extremely low now.
Right. When you look back, are you surprised some of the great companies like New England and Connecticut Mutual and Mutual Benefit don't exist anymore?
Yeah, it's very sad, very sad. And I knew some awfully good people, especially at Connecticut Mutual, and even at New England. But it's just it's a departure from the really fine life insurance background. Let's face it, Connecticut Mutual, for example, in their history, they were the company that was practically destroyed by fighting against the tontine. And I happen to have, I agree that the tontine was inappropriate at the very least. And it was a gimmick. And Connecticut Mutual fought it on principle. And so now they're gone. And it's just sad.
Does the industry have a heart?
Well, I'm not sure that an industry can have a heart. It has to be individuals in the industry.
Are there fewer today or more today or the same that really think and breathe and love the life insurance industry and profession the way you and I have witnessed others through the years?
I'm afraid to say that there are fewer today, but I've never done any kind of I've never made an effort to try to count them, either then or now. But I just have a feeling that there are fewer of them that are really, really dedicated to the business.
Is it tough to make a company ethical?
I don't think companies are ethical. I don't think it works that way. It has to be the individuals in the company that have to be ethical. And as I say, I'm fearful that we don't have adequate interest in the long-term welfare of the business and its customers that we used to have.
Think about that for a minute. The state of New York, the Department of Insurance, is holding some companies' feet to the fire on increasing the cost of universal life products. Could you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, I don't know how far they're going to get with it, but there is a proposed regulation. I'm sure nobody alive will have the time to read all the comments that come in on it. But the cost of insurance increases is an outgrowth of the move toward universal life. And I have to admit that I've never, ever been comfortable with the move to universal life. And I remember I did a lot of work on measurement of the price of protection. And in order to measure the price of the protection component of a life insurance policy, you have to separate it into protection and savings. And companies were all over me. Don't do that, you know. And you're not supposed to divide it. And it became very controversial. Then along comes universal life. And I'll never forget this. This is one of these telephone calls that comes out of the blue. One of the originators of universal life, I can't remember his name now, but he was, I'm pretty sure he was located on the West Coast. And he calls me on the telephone. And he says, "Joe, I hope you're satisfied." Because we've now developed a product that separates the protection and the savings. And I told him, well, I'm not, it's very interesting, but I'm not sure that I'm satisfied because I have a feeling that this is going to lead to trouble. And I think it has. And I mean, let's face it, the companies had the right to reduce dividends on traditional policies. But this business is going on today with the price increases on universal life, I think is going too far.
Did A.L. Williams irritate you?
That's an understatement. Actually, I just wrote about them initially, but something I said about them got them so angry that they sicked, I guess that's the right word, sicked the North Carolina Insurance Department on me. That is a long story. In fact, in my book, I had to devote an entire chapter to that incident. The North Carolina Department of Insurance essentially banned the distribution of the insurance forum, that particular issue in which I talked about A.L. Williams. They banned it in North Carolina. And as you might expect, that got me modestly fired up. But they had a connection with the department, and a young lawyer sent out a letter to A.L. Williams saying that, we've done this, and the letter, we found the insurance forum to be misleading. So that was the beginning of the battle, because A.L. Williams took that letter and used it as the centerpiece of a campaign to discredit the forum and me. And so we had to, we took the North Carolina Department to court. And it wasn't a very long case, but we won convincingly. And I'll never forget it. North Carolina appealed to the Fourth Circuit, the Court of Appeals, and the panel, the three-judge panel, ruled on the appeal, denied their appeal, without ever asking my attorney to say a word. They didn't even, it was obviously a First Amendment violation that they had committed.
If you were king for a day and were appointed, let's say, insurance commissioner for a state, are there 2 or 3 things you would want to make sure you did the first 60 days you were in office?
You sound like an incoming president now, you know. And the fact is that there isn't any way that it's too hypothetical a question.
Okay.
Because I could never accept a position like that. Because it would just be unsuitable for me. You know, what governor is going to appoint me when I tell him, when I would say to him that I'm going to call the shots and not you? I mean, what's he going to do? So it could never happen.
Are you surprised at the amount of variable life business that's been written over the years?
Not really. I regard it as a method of investing money rather than a method of really buying insurance.
Insurance.
Yeah, I've always regarded it more as an investment vehicle than insurance, but I'm not particularly surprised. It's part of what I would call the move away from life insurance. The other move away from life insurance is into annuities.
Right.
Annuities dominate now compared to life insurance. And the life insurance industry, what I think of as the life insurance industry, I think is in decline. And the annuity business is on the rise.
Is there a need today, more than ever? I'm biased. I'll tell you that before I ask you this. But do you think today there's a need for unbiased quality advice at a high level from someone that sells life insurance?
Absolutely.
Good.
It's a technical product, and it needs somebody that understands it and that will give advice that is in the best interest of the client, which gets me into really deep water with controversy. And I can tell you that I believe, I might as well say it, I believe that anybody selling life insurance to the public should have to operate under what's known as the fiduciary standard of care, rather than the much weaker suitability standard of care. And a lot of people disagree with me, and that's okay. But that's the way I feel, because the key on fiduciary responsibility is that you put the client interest first, not your own financial interest first.
If you had a room full of top flight agents that had done that for years.
Had done what for years?
Put the client first.
Okay.
Day in, day out, month in, month out. They made enough already to give unbiased advice and lived in small towns where their name meant something, but did so without a fiduciary responsibility hanging over their head. Would that surprise you, or
no,
you're
not.
Aware of that?
I'm aware of that.
Good.
But I'm not sure I like the way you worded the question, Scotty. The fact is that if they are putting their client's interest first,
Right.
and if they are carefully avoiding any kind of conflict of interest, they're operating under the fiduciary standard, whether you call it that or not. That is the fiduciary standard of care.
And what is maddening occasionally is third parties might say you don't give unbiased advice because you receive a commission.
Oh, well, the whole idea, commission, that gets me into another area. A lot of people find fault with the idea of commission-based sale. I don't see anything wrong with commissions because...
Would you say that again?
I see nothing wrong with commissions
Great.
per se.
Okay.
Except when they are in the interest of, when the primary focus...
Agreed.
Let me give you an example.
Sure.
The companies are, to some extent, responsible for this. I shall never forget an ad that appeared in a life insurance sales magazine. It happened to be on annuities, but the same principle applies. They were advertising, this is to agents, it's an agent-read magazine. They're advertising single premium deferred annuities. And they had a family of them. And as I recall, there were seven policies, seven annuities in the family. And there were only two differences among the policies were identical with two exceptions. One exception was the level of surrender charges. Some had large surrender charges and some had small. So you could sell the one with large surrender charge or the one with small or anyone in between. This is one company offering this. The other difference was in the commissions. And I will give you 8 guesses what the relationship was. The higher the surrender, I
won't need the first 7.
The higher the surrender charge,
right,
the higher the commission. And this was a company that was offering this to agents. And so it just floored me when I saw that ad.
Well, when you lead with that, it says something, and the fact that companies are driving that, not agents. Some agents sell those, but the people that are watching you this morning, day in and day out, 99% of the time, work on behalf of a satisfied client because it's too hard to do it any other way. The tough part is when you're first starting, you need to sell something because you need to eat, and companies haven't probably been very good about getting people into the business to get them up and running. Maybe not as good as some of the brokerage houses have for people that sell stocks and bonds, but it's a whole nother area.
Yeah, yeah.
Does it bother you sometimes when some of our domestic life insurance companies are purchased by foreign companies?
Not particularly. I guess I would prefer that they not be, but I think it's inevitable that it's going to happen if you've got a French company that wants to acquire Equitable, for example.
Bargain.
Well, Equitable, the Equitable case, Equitable was in financial difficulty. They were in serious financial difficulty, and AXA bailed them out.
Right.
And so AXA acquired them. Equitable, had to demutualize to be acquired. It was essentially a sponsored demutualization is what it was. But Equitable, based in New York did not have a demutualization statute. And the first thing Equitable had to do was to go to the New York legislature and get a demutualization statute enacted. I really trace the real beginning of what I call the demutualization wave to the Equitable. Because once they did it, it kind of, in a way, opened the floodgates.
Is it easier for a life insurance company who's trying to do the right thing function as a mutual as opposed to a stock company, or in your mind, does it make a difference?
Well, it certainly is different. And back when I was doing a lot of work on measuring the price of life insurance, I concluded that the form of corporate organization, whether you're a stock company or whether you're a mutual, should not be a major factor in the decision by the policyholder, because you had some mutuals charging quite high prices and some stock companies selling quite low prices for the consumer. And so I said that form of corporate organization should not be one of the factors that a person considers. Whether I would still say that today or not, I don't know. But we don't have many mutuals left, so that it's really, but a lot of the stock companies are getting away from using agents at all. And they're becoming more like banking institutions or investment banking institutions and so on. And I'm not sure that bodes well for the long-term life insurance industry.
Go back to that sentence you just said. When the CEO of a life insurance company didn't grow up in the life insurance business, never sold it, never was an actuary, came from the investment business, is there a better way to do this, or is that what we're stuck with?
I think the latter. I think we're stuck with it. And I think it's unfortunate that people in the life insurance business at senior positions have not come up through the ranks and gotten imbued with the idea of life insurance, the importance of life insurance.
Have the executives in the U.S. life insurance business been as sharp as, let's say, executives in the software business?
Can't answer that.
Okay.
I know a little bit about the executives in the insurance business, but I know nothing about the executives in the other business.
In life, you don't get 3 wishes. You get an abundance of them. And if somebody gave you one more wish to have 53 more years, would you do this again?
I think so. It's been exhilarating. I think it's been an interesting way to live one's life, digging into things that are of interest to him and which are of interest to at least a few other people, even if not large numbers.
You know what? To those of us who love the life insurance profession, you're held in the highest regard. You are one fine man and a wonderful human being, and we thank you for the life you've dedicated to this unusual, wonderful, sainted business, if you will. You're a great guy.
Well, I appreciate that, Scott.
Thank you, Joe.
Means a lot.